Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Rath Wang. Kyodo News has reported that the U.S. will be funding the construction of new port facilities on the Batanes Islands in the Philippines. A U.S. Army delegation is set to arrive at the islands in April to discuss the project further. With the Batanes Islands right across from southern Taiwan, we look at what this U.S. support for Philippine infrastructure means for regional security. Joining us today are Liu Fu-kuo, National Zhengzhi University Center for Security Studies Director, Jeremy Chiang, Foundation for Future Generations Taiwan Associate Research Fellow. A very warm welcome to both on the show. We've seen the U.S. increase its military presence in the Philippines with upgraded joint exercises and 4 new bases. It now plans to also support this new port. Professor, why is the U.S. supporting this project?
Because Batanes Island is somewhere around 200 kilometers away from the southern tip of Taiwan. Geographically, it is more convenient to engage if something happening in the Taiwan Strait, what we call the Taiwan contingency, because currently it would be extremely difficult for the U.S. directly engaging in the Taiwan contingency. So over the last few years, we have witnessed the United States government is now beefing up military and also other dimensions of preparation in Japan, as well as in the Philippines. Since last year, there are overall 4 new military bases would be turning into such a deep cooperation between the Philippines and the U.S. So for this reason, one of the potential scenario is, what if something happened? There are closer to 200,000 Filipinos working in Taiwan. And in time of a crisis, how exactly Taiwan and also the Philippines as well as the U.S. evacuate them in the proper way. So thinking of such a difficulty, the geographical sense, which makes the island Batam much convenient for them to consider. This is the first one. The second point, what I can come with this new development is Batam is located in the middle of Bashi Channel. Everyone knows currently this Bashi Channel strategically is critically important for the U.S. and China, as well as for Taiwan. So if the U.S. would be able to deploy something on the island, it would be sending much stronger signal and also helping such a strategic preparation for the U.S. and possibly connecting with the Philippines.
And also with other allies as well, as Australia, if they were to refill missions in for Taiwan near the Philippines, that would become very critical.
Yes,
I
so
understand.
2 specific functions. One is evacuating those different nationals away from Taiwan, and that would be a closest point to Taiwan. The second one is, in time of a crisis, if something really happened, they can provide other logistic support, including medical support, through this shortest distance sending into Taiwan.
It's great you mentioned that, Professor. Jeremy, the professor mentioned earlier about having a lot of overseas Filipino workers in Taiwan, and that's a main concern for Manila. How much of it is that concern as opposed to mounting an allied defense force in the case of a Taiwan contingency where the Chinese Communist Party or China attacks Taiwan?
So, well, I agree pretty much with what Professor Liu has stated. I think if we look throughout the years, protecting Filipinos overseas, OFWs, has long been a consistent theme in Philippine foreign policy. We've seen in the past few decades, Manila is willing to risk relations with other neighboring countries to protect the status of migrant workers and their other citizens, even when it relates to certain civil cases.
They take it very seriously. As you look at the airport,
they take
there's
it very
a whole
seriously.
lane for OFWs
Yeah,
going in.
So even within the context of rising tensions within the region, I think it's understandable that protecting as Professor Liu has mentioned, over 150,000 overseas Filipino citizens working in Taiwan is a top concern. I think that's also a shared concern by Indonesia and Vietnam. In terms of Philippines thinking towards other additional measures during such a contingency, I would think that it's understandable that they haven't commented much on that front. Though the 1951 MDT, the 1999 VFA, the 2014 EDCA does provide some scope for Philippine support in terms of American operations. I do think that ultimately it will be decided by the Filipino leadership during that time. Of course, that would be influenced by evolving U.S.-China, U.S.-Philippine, China-Philippine dynamics. I think it would also be influenced by the ongoing modernization of the armed forces of the Philippines. It would determine the capacity for such a support under those circumstances.
But it is on the table for now, given how U.S., Philippine, China, Taiwan relations are at the
So
moment.
they haven't commented much on it, but that would also mean that it's not a blanket rolling out for now.
So again, strategic ambiguity in this section.
Something we would have to need to continue to observe, definitely.
Speaking of contingencies, Philippine President Marcos Jr. said that the conflict in Ukraine also affects the Philippines and its surrounding region. In his meeting with German Chancellor Scholz, Professor, he mentioned that to the Europeans. What do you feel Marcos Jr. is trying to achieve here?
Looking back, before we get to this particular point, looking back somewhere around 2012, when the Philippines ran into maritime dispute with China surrounding Scarborough Shoal. That was an original point generating into a South China Sea arbitration case. So during that time, after several rounds of attempts connecting with Beijing, whether they may be able to solve through diplomatic means, but after several months, Manila decided under the previous president, Aquino III, then this is a similar strategy. The Philippine government went very far away from the region, reaching up to international organizations like UN and other similar international organizations, and also touch upon this issue with large country in European Union, which means that the Philippine government consider directly engaging with China will not be able to deliver productive outcome. So the government's strategy is go to international and then internationalize every issue, pop up all the incidents on the ground. So lately we have seen several rounds of news media reporting on the ground. Whenever the Philippines, either a Coast Guard ship or aircraft, they will be onboarded with international reporters, taking direct shot from the ground and reporting directly, releasing what happened on the ground. And that is exactly the strategy, as I can observe. The Philippine government, on the one side, trying to internationalize every issue, making all the country understanding what exactly happening and how China conduct such a maneuver in the South China Sea. The second point, probably, it's pretty sad to say that obviously the Philippines, for now, cannot really directly cope with Chinese pressure. So there is no other way other than going up to international media, trying to build on this international pressures against China. But this is how my observations through this process. And this time, President Marcos Jr. visited Germany and together met with Chancellor Scholz and then come up with such a concern. Of course, this is just considering something may happening surrounding this part of the world. And Ukraine obviously is very different from Taiwan as well as the Philippines. But under such a pressure, China sitting right next to Taiwan and the Philippines, so there is a referring from the interpretation of what President Marcos Jr. said in this conversation with Chancellor Scholz. So coming up, I do think there may be some room connecting with potential conflict happening in the South China Sea. This is exactly what the Philippine government currently worrying about.
So gathering more friends from international allies and countries,
Yes,
indeed.
yes, exactly.
Jeremy, I wanted to turn to you, since you've studied the Philippines and an expert in this area for many, many years. What do you think Taiwan can learn from this, given that Marcos has talked about Ukraine and we're right next to the Philippines.
In terms of what Taiwan can learn from the Philippines, I think, of course, the Philippines, due to its international status, has a easier route to approach these international allies. But I think so far, putting forward front and center, respect for international law, rule of law, and maintaining itself as a non-provocative player, wanting for peace and stability in the region. I think that is a message that resonates strongly, not only within this region, but as in the case of President Marcos, also resonates strongly in the European continent as well.
So you'd say it's the same as we see President Zelensky of Ukraine going over to other countries to garner more international support?
I think as we're embarking on a new Cold War, I think there is some level of return of, a ideological divide. So if Taiwan was to choose in terms of leaning closer towards democratic allies, I think that framing is something that would be of assistance to Taiwan's international approach.
Professor Liu, I just wanted to go back in terms of strategic sense, since you're an expert in this area, and how do you see Taiwan and the Philippines working together, given that there seems to be sort of a departure from the previous president in the Philippines?
I think on the theoretical part, it seems democratic country together we can make something happen. But on the real political, real politics in the international community, I would have to say this is very sad to come to this reality. It is impossible to engage because even if the Philippines is under such a pressure from China seeking for all the possible support from international community, but politically the Philippines has also formal diplomatic relations with People's Republic of China on the mainland. So on this particular note, these two countries together, they are on this formal channel connecting with each other, but as a result, they are also abide by the so-called One China principle.
It's interesting you mentioned the One China principle. This might be a question for both of you, but where is the Philippines? Because the One China principle, One China policy is very confusing. Different countries have different interpretations. Where is the Philippines exactly on this one?
I think the Philippines respects their One China policy very much. We've seen, for example, when National Security Advisor Eduardo Año came to office early on, he had a statement that also touched upon the One China policy. I think it's intentional on part of the Philippine government to not wanting to have their concerns towards Chinese behavior in the South China Sea mingle too closely with current cross-strait tensions. Of course, that's for the public to see, but under table, I believe it's also, understandable that, thinking around the Philippine security environment, their strategic planning, it's hard to imagine that they haven't taken a Taiwan Strait scenario underhand. And I believe that's also what the U.S. government would be strongly communicating with them in terms of American operations within the region. We've seen recent strategic initiatives by the Philippine government having a much more external outlook. And I don't think that's only for the South China Sea. I think they're also very cognizant that a cross-strait scenario would also definitely affect them. So of course, the One China policy is there, not necessarily only as a placeholder, but it's something to mitigate tensions with China. But at the end of the day, it could also be applied as a pressure point to force Beijing to enact, some favors, some leeway on part of Beijing.
Speaking of the Filipino response, the country's foreign ministry has rejected multiple Chinese maritime proposals, saying that they are against their national interests and would violate both their constitution and international law. The ministry also said that China breached protocol by disclosing sensitive details of their talks. Jeremy, with that, have Beijing actually breached those protocols?
So I think that the incident itself was an interesting case. So earlier this month, we had a report from the Manila Times, an anonymous Chinese official leaked that saying last year they approached the Marcos administration with 11 concept papers, each touching upon issues such as the Scarborough Shoal, the Second Thomas Shoal, ecological protection, and so forth. In that report, there was one specific plan that was named that saying that the Chinese agreed to one, rotate and resupply mission to the BRP Sierra Madre in the Second Thomas Shoal every month. and that the Philippine side would agree that they would not have any large-scale materials transported to the BRP Sierra Madre. Of course, the Marcos administration was furious. I think they clarified later that they had studied thoroughly these proposals, and that their understanding that because, for example, the Second Thomas Shoal was within the exclusive economic areas, zones of the Philippines, that these proposals would go against the Philippine constitutions. So thinking about the rationale behind these leaks, I don't think we can know for certain, but I think one possible explanation is that they wanted to put pressure on the domestic perception in the Philippines that it is Beijing that is not negotiating. They wanted through these leaks to portray the Marcos administration as the one that's not willing to engage in negotiations. So to exert pressure on the Philippine government to further negotiate on these terms. And I think another explanation will possibly be that they want to fracture the image of the Marcos administration as putting forward that the only good attitude toward Beijing is an uncompromising attitude. So with these leaks, I think it would definitely galvanize pro-Beijing voices within the Philippines. That could also exert pressure, as the former explanation, also to exert pressure on the Marcos administration to further negotiations with China.
Professor, speaking about Beijing, their proposals were rejected by the Filipinos. So what exactly are these proposals, and do you feel they actually don't make any sense?
This is very complicated. I think basically, looking back in the last few months, President Marcos Jr., when he presented his view vis-à-vis China, gradually we can sense the kind of attitude is softening, comparing with months before, especially before Christmas last year. And we can dig in the reason why domestically, not just connecting with those proposals presented by China. I do think there would be some political push from Beijing in this particular issue, South China Sea, those reefs and shelf, as well as those natural resources under the sea. So these are all together. But I do think this incident, why it came about, it is difficult to trace. But the reality is, I do know inside the Philippines, currently it has divided because the former president Duterte and his family strongly protest to the current government, saying that the Philippines should not have done so vis-à-vis China. And they obviously has taken very different perspective toward China as well as the U.S. So currently, President Marcos Jr. is under tremendous domestic pressures because another part of political forces are not happy with his policy vis-à-vis China and also connecting with the United States. So with this incident coming up, I think that there is a political conspiracy in Manila, but basically they want to probably sabotage such a possibility from China for them to push forward. But of course, looking into such an incident happening, especially around the Second Thomas Shelf, Chinese position is the Philippine government has violated such a prior understanding decades ago when they started discuss whether they should tow this Sierra Madres away from Second Thomas Shelf. There has been for decades the Philippines will implement such a understanding. Everything when they ship logistics stuff to the ships, they will send up the note to Chinese Coast Guard. There is a certain understanding, but once the Philippines started changing such a practice, China considered this as completely violating. So there are lots of violation from both sides. They are manipulating for their best interest. But I think this is a very critical and important for us to watch because as a result, it will be affecting bilateral relations between Beijing and also Manila.
To see how they escalate.
Yes.
Beyond growing security concerns, U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo has returned from a 2-day visit to the Philippines. She announced assistance to the Philippines in doubling its semiconductor or manufacturing and investing more than $1 billion to reduce Philippine dependence on China. Let's take a look.
We have an opportunity before us to strengthen this partnership, to take it to higher levels, to deepen it to unprecedented depths. So together, let's seize this opportunity. Let's commit ourselves to our joint economic and national security and to what lies ahead, which is the best to come.
Taiwan is the world's semiconductor powerhouse. The U.S. has also encouraged Taiwanese chip makers to expand their production in other countries. Professor Liu, this may be seen as also something similar what Taiwan experienced in terms of the U.S. encouraging friendshoring. How do they compare?
Currently, as we learn, the U.S. learned this specific strategy called de-risking. That was advocated by the European Union last year. And since then on, the U.S. gradually implements such a strategy. It comes into the idea, the so-called first priority is a so-called onshoring. If something semiconductor to be built, it has to be built on the homeland of the United States. This is the first priority. But whether it is mature for the U.S. to consider, it really takes some time to go further. But then it comes friend shoring, which is the idea connecting with Japan, Germany, and also potentially the Philippines or other India for now on the picture. But I think basically what we're seeing, the United States government is now encouraging regional countries, especially surrounding Taiwan.
Do you feel it's a win-win for Taiwan and for the Philippines in that case?
Looking from geopolitical sense, it does. But looking from our national interest, I think this is a question because for now, all the industrial clusters connecting with semiconductor is well developed over the last few decades in Taiwan, mainly surrounding Hsinchu Science Park. But currently, the idea is gradually encouraging or probably push a little bit TSMC to invest outside of Taiwan to secure such a production away from geopolitical change. And of course, for the Philippines, in the longer term, this may be a good idea, win-win situation for the Philippines and Taiwan. But to say it more specifically, it will take longer time because it is not simply TSMC just manufactures or invest in certain country. There should be mature infrastructure and also comprehensive industrial cluster. Combining with that, then the production will be reliable, effective. So for now, this is not the case for the Philippines and Taiwan. And I think more so about Japan and Taiwan. But I think basically this is a good idea in the longer term, may be possible.
Right, it's going to take time indeed. Also in the U.S. is a heated debate on banning TikTok, the fastest growing social media app owned by Chinese-based company ByteDance. National security concerns are growing over how the Chinese Communist Party could use the data of over 170 million American TikTok users to influence U.S. politics and public discourse. The U.S. House of Representatives passed a bill that could force TikTok's Chinese owner to divest the platform or face an outright ban. The bill will now go to the Senate for approval before being signed into law by President Biden. Also, in the context of the Philippines, the military has banned the use of TikTok last month, following debates last year on a nationwide ban. Jeremy, why is TikTok so controversial?
So across the world, basically concerns around TikTok revolve around two issues. One is it being a possible tool of data collection and cyber espionage on part of the Chinese Communist Party. Another, it has concerns around it being utilized as a social influence tool by Beijing's cognitive warfare programs. So evidently, the Philippines, especially its security sector, does share these concerns. So as Raf, you've mentioned, they've already banned usage of the app for security personnel. And also, I believe Philippine National Security Advisor Eduardo Año has already stated in front of media that if there was evidence that the app itself was collecting sensitive data on its 44 million users in the Philippines, they would not hesitate to recommend a nationwide ban to President Marcos. So clearly that's also on board right now. In terms of Taiwan, I believe our government has already stated that it's monitoring the legislative process in the United States very carefully and also looking for information from various sources. In terms of what Taiwan's current status is, I think it's already also banned for government devices for now.
So you think we might be able to see an outright ban as India has done and Nepal has done in Taiwan eventually?
I think all countries in the region are closely monitoring each other's legislative processes. Of course, the United States will be a leading example all countries will be looking closer to. So if we see the United States moving faster with this process, I believe it wouldn't be too out of the way to expect other countries like the Philippines, other countries in the Southeast Asia also putting forward similar campaigns.
Especially countries that are more allied or partners of the U.S.
And also, I think the concerns are not only about national security, right? For example, Indonesia, they've already banned certain Chinese apps from, for example, market monopoly concerns, for example, TikTok moving towards the e-commerce space. So I think the regulatory hurdles extend beyond national security concerns, and the legislative process in the U.S. only puts back the highlight on these issues.
Thank you very much, Professor Liu and Jeremy, for both of your insights. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe and see you next time.